Hello and welcome to the Payments Geek Roundtable. Once again, super excited to have our guest here today, Rene Pelegero. We'll get to the introductions in just a moment. This broadcast, this webinar was inspired by a very well-known kind of career advice book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And really, we're kind of going to give that the usual payments spin that we do here at the Payments Geek Roundtable. And we're going to talk about how to become the Chief Payments Officer. So a little bit of career discussion here today, a little different than we typically do or often do. And super excited to hear actually from Rene about his career. And I think really to just kind of set the mood, before I even ask Rene the first question, I thought, and I've done this a couple times before, we've used various kinds of like audiovisual cues. I want you guys to kind of get in this sense of that Dale Carnegie, maybe it's the 50s, you're thinking about where you're headed career-wise, and you just need that kind of inspiration. All right, now, I want you to listen and see if you can figure out what is that from. All right, that was enough of that. If you can, in the chat, identify who that is. There's some sort of something in it for you. I don't know. I'm just making that up, actually. But if you know what that's for, actually, and I'll challenge you, Rene completely nailed that in our call. He absolutely, from out of nowhere, said, hey, wait a second, isn't that from the game show? I'll tell you it's a game show.
You just called me old, man.
No, you're cultured. That's really what that means. That's really what that means. All right, so let's get started on all of this. No, it's not The Price is Right. It is not Family Feud. I've seen these things coming through. That's not, you haven't guessed it yet, so you can keep guessing. Rene, start us off. You've had a very distinguished career in payments. Tell people a little bit about that. And also, if you would, maybe to start, tell us how you got started. Did you grow up as a very young boy wanting to be in the payments industry? Was that where it all began for you?
No, actually, it was all a big accident. Did not really have any idea what payments even was. My first job was with a bank. And I was fundamentally clerical work, and I learned there the discipline about numbers and reconciliation and those kinds of things, something that I have found very, very useful down the road. But my career in payments, I kind of backed into it. I became an engineer, what is now called a software engineer. At the time, we were called programmers. And joined a technology company, which was very much involved in payments. The company was called at the time Tandem Computers, which is now part of HP. And a lot of those computers are used to drive ATM networks to run major market, stock markets and trade, as well as doing a lot of point-of-sale networks. And that's how I got involved into this, and I found it fascinating that transactions could travel halfway around the world, be looked up, authorized, and the response went back once again all over the world within a few seconds. And the technology associated with doing that, I found that tremendously fascinating. That led to jobs with ATM network, with GE Capital, consumer finance, and eventually landed at Amazon in 1999.
I heard of Amazon. That one I get. Yeah, absolutely. I knew the other one too.
My first day at the office was I showed up and I'm called to join a conference call literally straight from the lobby. And I'm told that the Switch Solo card in the UK was declining at 50% rate. And that the German colleagues were seeing a cross-border surcharge that they could not explain, since they were selling from Germany, charging in Deutsche Marks and all of that. And my boss goes, well, let me introduce you to Rene, and he's going to take care of all your problems. And that was my first day, and it was a rocket ride that never slowed down. And the great thing about my experiences at Tandem, GE Capital, and Amazon was that it was all global. And I found it fascinating how different people around the world actually exchange value, which is what a payment is. It's not just all about cards, as we sometimes like to think here in the US. It is a fascinating space. And so here I am, 20 years later, completely swallowed into the payments world and still loving every second of it.
Yes, you are a payments geek of some renown. You're a member of good standing of the Payments Illuminati. So really excited to have you here. Thank you. Thank you for that little trip down history lane. Speaking of a little trip down history lane, I've got one more little kind of visual. I think Lindy, who helps me prepare for these things, and generally actually prevents you guys from having to deal with a whole bunch of nonsense. Calls this a visual gag. But hold on. Let's get in the mood again. Let's use this to help us kind of understand from whence we have come. All right.
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
Okay. So I don't think that's our word today. I think our word today is payments, obviously. But I'm wondering, what's so different now? Like, that looks pretty dated, and that movie's got all kinds of fun things going on. So we won't get into the rest of the story. Graduate, Dustin Hoffman. That's awesome. What would you say is markedly different today from that journey you just walked us through in payments? If somebody's in a different place in their career, or they're getting more actively focused on payments as a career today, what would you say they really can think of as, well, that's not so applicable, and hey, in today's market in payments, this is now true. Maybe wasn't.
Well, payments have gotten cool over time. By that I mean, if you look at all the fintechs, there you go. If you look at all the fintechs that are entering the space, companies like PayPal, for whom I also worked as well, introducing new ways of exchanging value, Venmo and the like. Even now, a lot of Apple and Epic, which is a company that sells games, are in the middle of a major lawsuit trying to figure out who controls the payments flow in the sale of games that are being sold through the Apple Store, through the iTunes Store. Look at what's going on with Google Pay and Apple Pay and all of these new methods of payment, Facebook getting into the payments space. And what everyone is trying to do is trying to find a better way, a more expedient way, a more convenient way to exchange value, which is, again, what payments is about. So when you start thinking about, payments in that manner, and then you realize that when we are working, we're consultants, so we work for lots and lots of clients, which are merchants primarily. But if you're working for a merchant, you realize then that the way in which payments are accepted, that it is the livelihood and the blood of the company. And once you get to that stage, then you need to help your company, your merchant, recognize exactly what that value is about. And so hopefully today's conversation will lead us a little bit down that path as to the kinds of things that individuals who are passionate about payment can actually do to bring about that awareness and visibility, and potentially signifying a career path that may lead to become a chief payments officer.
Woof, woof. Yes. Well, I think the most important thing, and I kind of tuned out a little bit after you said payments are cool. I was just sort of basking in that a little bit. My children try to assure me differently about the coolness of payments. But, for me, actually, that moment when I realized, hey, this is a little different was Jack Dorsey founding Square, right? Like sort of, hey, there's the Twitter guy. That's cool. Right? Twitter's cool. How you use it, that's different. Twitter itself, that's pretty cool. But then this notion of, hey, that guy's now in payments too, in a meaningful way. It's very different. And you know what, actually, as we continue to look for trends kind of maybe from things we've seen in the past, we've seen CRM, we've seen procurement, we've seen IT, of course, turn into a C-level position, over the last 7 decades, maybe since the graduate anyways. And I think what you're saying is one day we're going to see Chief Payments Officer right alongside all those other C-level titles. But I guess the question that I have is, what does that actually mean? Like, what does that person then do? And organizationally, what does that mean? I think, if we take IT, the CIO as an example, organizationally, there's a whole bunch of different models, right? Some places IT is very separate. Sometimes IT is very closely aligned with business units, embedded maybe in business units. From an organizational design perspective, how do you see this progressing in this new world where chief payments officers are named? Oh,
no, that's fine. The chief payments officer is fundamentally the executive face of the company regarding the payments function, whether it is payment acceptance or in the case of marketplaces, payment acceptance as well as payouts as well. And the chief payment officer must support and champion a payments agenda to the C-level suite and to the board of directors. It needs to create and develop an end-to-end payments strategy. This is particularly important to companies that have a global reach. And when you are an e-commerce company, you tend to always be thinking from a global perspective. Right. The chief payments officer needs to interface with the CFO because of the financial nature of payments. He needs to interface with the CMO and talk about marketing and use cases that will enhance the customer experience, as well as new methods of payments that may serve the company well. It also needs to interface with the CTO and the CIO to make sure that the technology groups are supporting or working in conjunction with the CPO to ensure that all the compliance aspects of regulation, whether it is card schema regulation or governmental regulation, that are actually being met. For example, things like strong customer authentication requirements in Europe. And it also needs to interface with the HR organization in areas of creating career path and building a team and providing necessary education to do that. So all of those functions, all of that needs to be part of managing what I call the payments refinery. Because if you think of a model that as to how a chief payment officer will look like, you almost need to create, okay, what does payment look like in the physical world? An analogy that we use quite frequently is that of a refinery. You get petroleum at one end, the oil goes through refractors, heaters, pumps, and pipes, and all of that, and you have gasoline coming out at the other end.
Sure.
In the middle of that, there is a control room. This control room is basically making sure that there are no leaks, that there are no fires caused by those leaks, and that there is an optimization. Yeah, and that there is an optimization of the maximum amount of gasoline that you can come out from that barrel of crude. Well, payments is kind of the same thing. You get transactions at one end. The transactions go through PSPs, gateways, acquirers, issuers, payment networks, and you have cash in the bank at the other end. However, very few organizations, other than companies that have recognized the strategic value of the payments function, have created the control rooms necessary to manage that environment. So that's probably one of the first tasks that a CPO must do, is to create that control and management with all the proper knobs and levers to actually manage the payments function to the maximum benefit of the company. As to where it should reside, we always believe that organizations don't get anything done, people do. In my career at Amazon, in my 4 years that I was at Amazon, I reported into the technology organization, to the CIO, I reported into the CMO, and I reported into the treasurer. So all across the board. And not because they were trying to figure out what is the best role, because this just actually shows the cross-functional impact that the payments function has. And what is important for a chief payment officer is to find that area that will be the most supportive and will be the most accommodating to actually do that. Should she report to a CEO, that they may come very well to that, but probably given the financial nature of payments, I envision that in the near future, it's going to be more of a CFO or reporting organization more than the others, but it needs to be able to build very strong links and very strong bonds with the other C-level executives, because what we are really interested in here, not only from a career path, because is to make sure that the payments function is aware as to what is going on with the company strategically, and not to have a story that probably many people in the audience have already heard, is that the payments team gets called into a meeting and says, and they are being told that the company is going to start selling in Brazil in 2 months, and we need to set up payment acceptance there, and without them even knowing something like that. So that level of visibility is what is the most important thing. Yes.
Then everybody gets to learn about what Boleto is and why installments are very, very important. Brazil is fantastic.
And everyone hits the roof, because whoever is in payments know how challenging it is to do payments acceptance in Brazil. And this is a story that we've heard not only once, but multiple times throughout our consulting years.
Somebody having their Brazil day. Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, it's quite a juggle. And I think, that may be one of the key things, and you described it yourself. We actually have, marketing is always the one that surprises me, but we have a couple of clients where payments reports to marketing. So your most executive, before you get to the CEO, is actually a marketing executive. So that may strike people as obvious, or that may strike people as not what they expected. I don't know. But describe a little bit of that juggle of, well, these are all very different organizations. Cultural, the way a marketing organization functions is pretty different typically from the CFO's culture, and different again from the CIO's culture. The things that they do and are focused on, talk about, are all pretty different. How does that juggle work practically?
Well, if you think about it, the CPO needs to be the payments product manager at large. He needs to interface with all of the different organizations, and he needs to think as a product manager. And by that I mean he needs to kind of just have one dimension. One of the organizations that I left earlier on that it needs to be interfaced with, as well as legal. When you're dealing with vendors and having contractual things, you need to interface with legal. You need to educate a lot of these different groups as to how payments impact finances, the marketing, customer service, the legal structure, creating legal entities in countries to make payment acceptance easier and more convenient. All of those are things that it is a very, very cross-functional type of activity, and therefore the chief payment officer needs to be able to deal with a lot of those things and learn as well, whether it is learning about tort law and business law, or whether it is learning about marketing type of activities. It actually, I believe, turns the chief payment officer a very, very good cross-functional and well-educated corporate contributor.
Well, I think we're going to switch gears just a little bit and start talking about some more of those kind of implications. But I want to just kind of break things up a little bit. Nobody's correctly guessed in chat what the song was. So I'm going to play it again. And I want you guys to, while you're listening very attentively to Rene, I want you to see if you can come up with this. It would be, I think, ideal. I'm just rewinding it to the beginning. If you guys, somebody can figure this out, we'll figure out something fun to send you. All right, here we go. Oh, it's just so good. It's so good. You gotta wait for this part. I think it's my favorite part. All right, so keep guessing. Send us in chat your questions. I think there's also a Q&A button. Doesn't matter, chat or Q&A. Not the dating game. That's a very good guess, but not the dating game. So it's a game show. We talked about that. I'll give you one more hint. It's sort of on point. As close as I ever get to being on point. If you've watched any of these, I'm kind of all over the place. But this is sort of on point, almost. Okay, so in chat, send us your questions, or Q&A is fine too. I don't think we have any, no, we don't have any questions coming through. That's a good guess too, Big Money No Whammy, which is actually called something else. I can't remember.
Hey, there it is.
No, I can't remember what that is. Big Money No Whammy, that's not it. That's another.
What about Jeff's Cross's answer?
Oh, yeah, Jeff Cross. That's kind of cheating. He works for Modo. But I guess, oh, no, he just sent it to us, so we can't say, we can say, yeah. So a Modo employee who cannot win just sent in something that was close to right. He didn't even get it all the way right. He misquoted part of it. Anyways, okay, keep the guesses coming. Let's just stay engaged here. Keep the questions coming, because I got questions for days for Rene, which he knows. But you guys should get in on this too. Not the magic game. Very good, but no. So let's dig in on the technology front. I don't know. This is my favorite thing. Let's talk about platforms. Let's talk about, one of the things that we've seen, right? Like part of how the CFO really kind of organizationally got that reach that you're talking about, the cross-functional reach, was with ERP. And then we saw CRM, Salesforce, people like that. We've seen data and analytics, Palantir, obviously, super in the news. Way back when, there's some stuff around procurement, Ariba, supply chain planning. A number of these cross-functional things have actually had technology platforms underneath. That's a little self-serving, but let's talk about platforms. Let's talk about, okay, is that something that people are building generally? Is it something they're buying generally? Is it something that there's kind of a spectrum or a middle ground? How do you think about like the platform with respect to this function?
The platform, as you call it, generally is not very clean. It's generally a bit of a challenge because, once again, without lack of attention and lack of central focus and a proper strategy, and more important, a lack of a payments-oriented architecture, you have situations where you have ERPs initiating payments. You have booking engines and subscription engines initiating payments. You have an order entry system initiating payments, fulfillment systems initiating payments. And that's not really what these engines were originally built for. They were built to keep track of inventory of airline seats and hotel rooms. They were built to do magazine subscription. They all need to get information about a payment. But when you have all of those, primarily if you're buying those particular functions from a third-party provider, every time you want to introduce a new payment method, you have to wait nearly a year and pay $500,000. And we actually seen that in multiple places. So one of the things that we advise, and this is part of the overall product management function of the CPO, is to create an architecture that actually layers the core functionality, the core accounts receivable and accounts payable, and whatever else that core engine is doing, whether it's managing inventory or whether it is shipping books out of a warehouse, and separate that from the actual payments function, which is the one that is tasked with sending a transaction to the appropriate network, retrying the client transactions, routing transactions to optimize for approval and or for lowest cost, to be able to receive information and consolidate information from multiple payment providers. That's the kind of architectures that we have also been advocating, because nowadays some merchants, some very enlightened merchants have built something like that as well. But there is also an emerging number of vendors who are providing similar functionality, but it is very difficult for merchants to implement unless there is a proper functional architecture that is oriented towards facilitating the payments activity rather than making it an adjunct or something that the core engine has had to do because there hasn't really been much other support from the rest of the organization.
I think I've read some stuff from you calling that platform something about orchestration. So I think that's.
I'm sorry, say again, something about
orchestration. I think I've read from you in the past. Just a little fun.
Yeah, we do call of that activity, routing and managing the payment activity and optimizing all of that. We call all of that orchestration. Because in reality, that payments platform that we're talking about, and we've been talking it up, we have been talking up the concept for a couple of years now, is intended to support not only pull payments, as in the case of cars, but also push payments, as in the case of somebody sending money to you. If you look around the world, you'll be surprised how many systems are out there initiating push payments through the real-time rails that a number of countries are implementing all over the world. And so those kinds of architectures do not exist today in most American-based merchants who are used to sending an authorization and waiting for a response, rather than sending an authorization and going and looking for the answer somewhere else, which is some people tend to call asynchronous payments. So all of those architectural decisions, it's not that the chief payment officer is going to be doing the architecture, but he needs to set that he or she need to set the direction to say, not only are we supporting pull, we're also supporting push, we're taking payments in, we're pushing payments out, and to accommodate the variety of different payment systems that there are around the world, if that is indeed the charter for the company.
Well, I want to pause you just one more time because we have a winner. I'm going to play the song one more time just so people can play along. But we have somebody who guessed it correctly. Oh, we have two. We have two who guessed it correctly. All right. Anybody else want to jump in with one more? We've got two. Oh, Elizabeth, you sent that to everybody. Yes, you're right. It's the pyramid. Rob Stasiak. I'm not sure I'm saying your name right now. Stasiak, maybe? Stasiak? It said pyramid a little bit ago, but he just sent it to us. And then Elizabeth Joa just got, well, it's close. It's the $25,000 pyramid instead of the $10,000 pyramid. But you guys are both our big winners today for the random game that I just made up. And we'll have to figure out something to send you. So send me an email, bruce@modopayments.com, and I'll send you something. Actually, you want to do something else, Wendy will probably send you something. But I will sign up and be responsible. Cool. Well, I think you know the moving on from technology. Let's talk about the team, right? So a chief payments officer, obviously, this is an organizational thing we're talking about. We're talking about a place within a much broader organization, a merchant probably of some sort. It could be anything, really. You know, we talked a little bit about refineries. Actually, fuel companies have very large payment operations, and we're some of the first to do some of the most interesting and innovative things too. But let's talk about the people. Let's talk about a payments team. What does it mean to build a payments team? And what is best of breed? What are you shooting for?
Well, it is a payments team is same as the CPO. I mean, it needs to cover a number of multiple areas. If you're looking, first let's look as to what the makeup of a hypothetical payments team would be. We talked about the concept of the refinery earlier on. So you need to have somebody that is sitting in front of the monitors and moving all the levels and gauges and so forth.
Yeah, and understands all that stuff.
And understand that stuff.
Right.
So you need to have
buyers too, probably.
Indeed, understand the pricing, understands the flow of transactions. And so that actually requires to have some kind of a financial analyst or some kind of a operational analyst that is looking at things like approvals, declines, all of these other ratios that may indicate the performance of the payments operation, whereas the financial analyst is making sure that we get every cent, no transactions were dropped on the floor, and that we are not being subjected to downgrades that are increasing the cost of our payment acceptance. In addition to that, there needs to be a very strong, and this is very hard skill to find, very strong product managers that can actually communicate the needs if the payments team does not have its own engineering team, to be able to communicate very clearly what the payment organization's needs are to the engineering organization, and to be able to define proper business requirements, to be able to identify what the future needs will be that don't have to be programmed right away, but certainly you can leave the little tabs so that you can make those enhancements a lot easier later on.
So easy to say, but so hard to do well.
It is very hard indeed.
Right. Yeah.
Project managers, of course, usually required as well within any kind of team. One of the functions that we also, I've done this several times, either working for clients or working directly for an employer, is to have a vendor management teams. Whether it is one person or it's a team depends on how many vendors the merchant is interacting with. And that is the person that is responsible for calling out all of the different problems that anyone might encounter with a vendor. And finally, probably almost as important, I think, and I call it important because I played that role several times, is to have like an industry specialist. And the industry specialist is someone that is out there and in the industry, learning what is going on in the industry, attending all of these conferences and seminars, nowadays participating on all of these webinars, and identifying where the market is headed, and to be able to not only influence, in some cases, the marketplace and influence the payment providers, if your company is large enough, should be able to do some of that, but also to bring back that knowledge and education and to impart that across not only the rest of the payments team, but also across the rest of the company. So each one of those roles does not have to be one single full-time person. It's a function of the size of the company. In some cases, the product manager could be the industry manager. In some cases, the financial and operational analyst is the same person. And in some cases, you're going to have 2 or 3 of those on each side, depending, again, as to how many vendor relationships you might have. Now, getting the payment knowledge to all of these people and educating these people, because there is no university for payments that I am aware of out there. However, there are a number of organizations that try to offer at least the preliminary functions, the preliminary education with regards to how payments are actually operate, primarily here in the United States. MRC, the Merchant Risk Council, has done some of those programs. The Merchant Advisory Group just announced a couple of days ago that they are launching a Payments 101 program that anyone will be able to enroll in and to be able to get the basics. And most a little plug, taking pride of the fact that we have been helping the MAG with some of their educational programs. But it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of patience. And the sad thing, and this is part again of the career thing, is that I have seen many people that have the passion for payments, develop a great deal of knowledge and expertise. If after 2 or 3 years, they move on to something else. Why? Because there is no career path. And I think that this is also something that merchants, large merchants, need to understand, that by creating a payments organization and have much higher visibility, then these people who have acquired a skill set that is tremendously valuable continue to contribute to the company by continuing to exercise and to hone that skill.
Hey, so this is great. It actually relates to a question from, I think it's me, right? It's okay. We're all friends here. Gina wrote, hey, I'm interested in growing my career in this space. What associations do you recommend that aren't necessarily about this company membership level, but are more on a professional membership level? And I think you're starting to reference that. Is there like an aspect of either MRC or MAG, Merchant Risk Council or Merchant Advisory Group, and I think Lynn just put that in the chat as well, where, obviously, there's a chartered financial analyst in kind of the Wall Street business world from an investment perspective. There's CPAs. There's all kinds of different kind of. I don't know whether it's necessarily that certification. I think it's more just, are there groups? Maybe it's those groups, or there are other groups where they can help each other develop and provide resources.
Yeah, unfortunately, as an individual, hi Gina, by the way, it's good to hear from you. Certainly the best places where to learn about what's going on in the payments are those organizations like I just mentioned, the MRC and MAG, maybe the Payments Education Forum, but those usually require you to be or participate as part of a merchant. I am not aware of any organization, and if anyone wants to contribute on the chat that makes suggestions, I will be very keen to know as well. What we have done a couple of times as a way of trying to create synergies. There are people that are in the payments space in geographical areas. Many years ago, I launched a group called the Merchant Payments Roundtable when I was with Amazon. And we were bringing initially merchants from all of the early e-commerce merchants. Later on, when I was doing some consulting down in the Bay Area, we began to put BYOB meetings at one of the local restaurants in Palo Alto, where different people from different companies, the PayPals, the Googles, the Adobes, and so forth, and because we all kind of know each other, created these little sessions where we will have a glass of wine and have a little pizza and talk about what's going on in the world of payments. You do it to some extent as well with your Illuminati sessions, some of the conferences.
Payments Illuminati, we're not supposed to speak of that. Hopefully, actually.
Yeah.
Now, we're trying to start that again, quite honestly. That's for those of you who have not had the opportunity to join us either at Money 2020 or MAG. We have a sort of little dinner that we do. It's very payments focused. It's very not, selling or advertising or marketing. It's really about this exact point.
So even here in the Northwest, I'm based in Seattle. We have the Northwest Payments Roundtable, which is kind of sponsored as well by MRC, but it brings the likes of T-Mobile, Amazon, Microsoft, REI, Starbucks. Yeah, and most of them are actually hosted by one person or an individual. Says, hey, let's have a meeting, and I'll host it at my office, and they all come in. They spend a day just talking about the payment problems of the day. And the next time, 3-4 months from today, somebody else raises his or her hand to host it. So Gina, that will be potentially a way, to reach out within the community where you are located and try to see if there is a way to exchange and gain that exchange of information. Nowadays, I think that geography is no longer the limiting factor since we're all doing Zoom type of meetings.
Right. Everybody's in like this. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was just thinking, I've talked to, and just the names escaped me, the gentleman who founded PayPay, which I think also did something similar. But I think it's a great question. It's a great question, Gina, and keep the questions coming. Love to see more. Okay, and I'm getting a little feedback that I should zoom in here a little bit. Maybe that'll help on the audio front. There we go. Okay, so next question for you, Rene. And we're kind of transitioning here to talk a little bit more, and I think that was exactly what we should do about, well, let's zero in on the specific things that folks can do to establish or put themselves in a position to ultimately end up as a chief payments officer. I think it'll take a village. We'll have to all be working together, as you just mentioned. But I think, one of the things that we want to not shirk or shy away from is some of the challenges that are going to be in this. And business transformation in general is challenging. And you've talked a little bit about this in terms of getting everybody to play ball. I'm just wondering if you could talk not only about some of the maybe tips and tricks on how to get folks to join, but also are there any principles or maybe even you call them rules that you want to sort of establish and say, okay, here's how to get folks in alignment. And generally, when we talk about transformation, we talk about major changes. Alignment is the first word that comes up as both a challenge and an opportunity, quite frankly.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. The thing that we advise our clients is that have achieved this level of awareness that payments is indeed a valuable asset, and we need to invest in it. And for the people who are working within the payments space, fundamentally we tell them, gotta do 3 things. And each one of those things has multiple things underneath them. But the first thing is keep the lights on and make sure that there are no major problems related with break-ins and security. A good colleague of mine who runs payments for a good friend of mine who runs payments for a major telecom has been told by his CEO, there are only 2 things, I don't care what you do, but there are 2 things that I never want to hear. 1, that we're in the media because we have an outage, and 2, that we cannot process payments because that we're in the media because of a break-in that we have had our data compromised. And number two, that we are in the media again because we're an outage and we don't have the capability to accept payments at the stores. And so those are his two commanding things. And he's done some very interesting things where now, even if there are power outages at the store, he is able to continue to conduct business because they're using tablets and they're using, guess what? The 5G, 4G telephone networks. And so they are much more resilient. And that kind of creativity, that kind of looking for ways to create and add value and to maintain. So that's the first thing, is always keep the lights on. And understand one of the KPIs that we suggest to our clients is to measure how much revenue you are taking every hour of the day. Because if you have an outage on any time during the day, there are two things that the CPO should do. Is number one, CPO needs to ensure that his product or project managers develop run books to immediately execute in case of an outage. Who calls whom, and it's kind of, you don't begin at that moment to try to figure out what do we do. All of that should be pre-planned, all of that should be pre-thought out. Who's keeping track of time? Who calls what vendor? When did the vendor respond? And things like that. Because at the end of that outage, you will have, first of all, you want to minimize the outage, but at the end, you will also have the opportunity to tell the vendor, we lost this many sales because you were down. And so potentially you now have a financial claim against the vendor, especially if you have a strong service level agreements. The other thing that is also important for payments team to know is what is the value of a customer? How many times has he come in and shop? And this is information that the marketing people eat up all day long. So those are the first things. You got to make sure that your systems are well protected and that the systems continue to operate and make it as transparent as possible. The next thing that needs to get done, and this is probably one of the toughest one, is to demonstrate the value of the overall payments function. And understanding the value of the customer is important, certainly contributes to that. But you also need to demonstrate how you're managing the cost of payments, how you're are able to save the company tens of thousands or millions of dollars, depending on what kind of a state the payments platform is at, by minimizing downgrades, by minimizing fees, by minimizing any other kinds of fines that you may encounter, and report that and express that in a manner in which senior level executives can actually see what will be, because now you're telling them, if we're down for 1 hour, this is the financial hit. Or if we accept this particular form of payment, it's going to cost us this much. And to continuously show, either through avoidance of chargebacks, avoidance of fees, and all of that, lowest cost routing, that you're actually significantly contributing to the bottom line of the company. And the third thing is the management of your external vendors, being able to make sure that there are service level agreements in place, that you're actually doing quarterly business reviews and constantly improving the operations of the payments platform. In many cases, vendors can be your friends, but in many cases, errors are made. And as Ronald Reagan used to say, trust, but verify. So you always have to check and see what, and make sure that everything that comes and all of the reports and all of the activity that is actually cross-check and reconcile with your own internal activity. Because we have seen in our career many errors being committed, and so it is important to demonstrate that that value to the organization. So with those three things as general categories, then you can go down the path to start building strategies as to how am I going to accomplish each one of those particular activities.
How do you use the other organizations' focus and energies to help you, obviously? So,
yeah, indeed, because for example, we have heard and we have surveys that actually indicate that if a customer is declined, for example, and this is the proverbial do not honor. Nobody knows why the customer is declined. and you don't try to do something to try to save it, surveys have shown that about 26% of those cardholders will either reduce their patronage with you, or they will just go somewhere else and you never see them again. And so the idea of trying to save that relationship with the cardholder, the marketeers used to say many years ago, talk about those moments of truth. And I could not think of any more important moment of truth than taking money from somebody. That's a very intimate proposition. And so that always has to be perfect, it has to be accurate, and it has to be convenient. So now you're getting down into how do I continuously improve, but going back to the top, keep the lights on, enhance the value, and demonstrate and show the value, and manage your vendors.
So what would you say you really have to be an expert in to become a chief payments officer? You know, we just keep using the same examples that we have. You kind of have a sense of, okay, a CFO is probably got to be able to read some income statements and financial statements. A CIO probably needs to understand technology. CTO certainly needs to understand technology pretty well. What would be the kind of key areas of not just payments, but like domain-wise, where are the things you feel like now people need to understand X or Y or Z? And I think you've touched on several of them. How would you maybe summarize that?
Well, if I understood the question correctly, is the payments function relates and touches and depends upon these particular organizations that you mentioned. It's funny, many years ago, I mentioned the Merchants Payment Roundtable. We went out, I was working for Amazon at the time, and we went out to try to solicit merchants to come and join us. And people at the companies, at these merchants will say, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, but who do we send? We got somebody in finance that manages the bank relationships, or we got somebody in customer service that manages all of the payment-related disputes and so forth, or do we send the technologists that are managing the payments platform? So all of those things, that's what needs to be really brought in together, because in many cases, still at many organizations, each one of those are doing their little part in payments, but are not necessarily coordinating and working together. And add to that the lack of a platform or a technology infrastructure that is supportive of the payments activity, then you have a payment situation where, it is, I'll try to be kind, it's under-optimized, let me put it that way.
Sure. Very, very good.
Hopefully I answered your question, because I wasn't sure I understood it.
Well, yeah, no, so I think the answer is actually a little bit of all of the above, and you've touched on this, right? So Chief Payments Officer needs to be able to read contracts. Chief Payments Officer needs to understand how technology impacts the delivery of the payments function. The Chief Payments Officer needs to understand marketing and the impacts on the customer experience and how that drives overall business value. So I think you've said it now a number of times. It's a little bit of a jack of all trades. I guess maybe just throw in a little bit more like details. To me, one of the things that I find fascinating about this business is the multiple participants, often referred to as a multi-sided network. And understanding those roles, understanding, oh, wait a second, yeah, the way the card systems work, or the way PayPal works, or the way bank transactions work really depend a lot on that kind of overall structure of payments. And that drives a lot of things, including costs and performance and functions and all kinds of stuff. So to me, that's actually one of the biggest attractions of payments. Before you get into, of course, the awesome stuff when you're writing code and your bits flying back and forth on wires and whatever. But to me, that sort of basic understanding, and I think we touched on that before too, well, how do all these parties relate to one another, and what are sort of the schemes, as the Europeans might say. What would you say, kind of moving on to the last couple of questions, if you have a question, please fire away, that's great. What would you say is the way to get past just being viewed as a nuisance? I know you've often talked about, sometimes payments think of it as payments are thought of as a necessity or a nuisance. Maybe you just expand on that and like, how do you make the case that this is strategic by really appealing to people? So like, to me, it's obvious, and you already said it. It's a moment of truth. It's sort of, if you will, the fulfillment of the entire business's activity. Like, the reason the business exists is get to the moment of payment. And so therefore it should be like, oh, but it's not already obvious to people. So how do you attack that? Say, no, it does matter. It's not a nuisance. It's not just a necessity. It's critical.
Yeah, that's where the sales side of product management comes into play. Because in reality, and we have a series of stages of growth for a company where payments is considered a burden, or if not, payment is considered a necessity or a utility, kind of like the phone or the electricity. You know it's there, but if it doesn't work, that's when you notice it. And I think it sometimes may take a couple of outages of, power outages, or the telephone is not working or the internet is down, to realize, hey, payments is a little bit like that as well. It needs to be managed, it needs to be looked at, and it can contribute value. It's not only you're playing defense, you can also play offense in terms of showing, listen, if I had a team of analysts that is actually able to look at as to how to best route these transactions, and that's going to result in so much lower cost on our payment acceptance. Or if I had analysts that say, every time that we resubmit a chargeback, that we represent a chargeback to this particular bank, and we provide this compelling evidence, we always win that chargeback. And to be able to actually demonstrate in hard financial terms what the benefit is, you will still find, as we have found across our consulting careers, that there are some companies that still don't get it and will never get it. And sadly, it is sad. We know of a fairly large company, $50+ billion. And by the way, the size of the company has little to do with where they stand. 50 billion in turnover. In their P&L, they report almost down to a very level of detail. 1% of their expenses are due to pension and benefit cost, another 2% for something else, and then there is an other of 14%. And I remember asking whether that was certain broken down, because my contention was that anywhere from 3 to 5% of that 14% was the cost of accepting payments. And this is an organization that wasn't really managing payments. It was just, let's give it to the gateway. They will handle all of it for us. And they basically said, Rene, we cannot argue with you because we really don't know. And so here is a 4 to 5%. And as with new interchanges coming in April of next year, and given the increases.
It's all going down, right? I mean, this is all just going to be benign and it's all going to be good. What? No?
All right, you're being facetious there. So, no, I mean, the anticipation is primarily now in a COVID year, and when people are moving to more and more remote payments and card not present payments, the fees that are going up are card not present. And downgrades as well are going to be significantly larger downgrade. And so point of that being is that if you're not managing that, you don't even know what you're leaving on the table.
That's right.
And I think it's fiduciary responsible for any organization, and whether this falls on the CFO or somebody else, each company must decide on that. But once you start echoing that message, and once you start singing that song, and you're able to present in a compelling way, not necessarily antagonistic way to your superiors, that, hey, this is what we do and this is what we contribute. There is no magic that certainly this is what is going to happen, that the executives will all of a sudden realize, oh, look what we have here. But certainly that's the path that we are advising. And some of our clients have actually been successful getting the necessary support to create the platforms and the infrastructure they need.
I think you just framed it perfectly. So the net is, there's a lever here that when you pull on it in the right way, it will give you points of net margin, points. And that's probably the only thing the CEO wants to hear, and it is really, really great. So I'm just looking to see whether or not I captured any other questions. If I didn't ask something or Rene didn't touch on something that you want to hear about, then please hit us up in chat. And what I'll do is I'll just give you the last prepared question that I have for you today while we're waiting to see if there's anything we didn't cover to make sure that we end well here over the last 5 minutes. So let's just assume that you've made the case. Everybody on this call is like, yes, I want to be the chief payments officer of my organization. I'm going to onboard everything you just said. This is fantastic. I'm going to rewatch this thing over and over again, put my hand on my forehead for not being the first to figure out that it was the $25,000 pyramid for the song. What should be the first step? So this is a long journey. We'll talk about some of the challenges. But where would you send people first to say, okay, the way to make this case, which is going to take a long time industry-wide, we're going to have to probably work together in new and much more collaborative ways, even than we normally do. Payments is pretty collaborative. But where's the first kind of place you would send somebody who's within a large organization? We'll just imagine this person. They're in this large organization. They're switched on for payments, which is why they're here listening to this today. And they're like, you know what? I want to start pushing my organization in the right direction. What's the place to start?
The place to start, I think, establish the proper KPIs if none exist or if they're not there. KPIs that establish the cost of payments and being able to do deep drilling as to the brand, the card type, the what have you, the is it a credit, is it a debit, those kinds of things by region, by country, by merchant ID. Try to identify all the nuances and try to find out what your outliers are, your cost of payouts, your operational KPIs, approval versus decline ratios, the refund versus settlement, and any other ratio that you think, any other that will give you an insight as to how the payments operation is proceeding. Your chargeback to sales ratios as well. Make sure that you're not getting caught by surprise by chargebacks or some other kind of a fraudulent activity. If all of these ratios already exist and are being monitored and are being analyzed, because there is a lot of information, there is not just raw data, there is a lot of information. And if these are analyzed, then the next thing becomes to create a composite picture that can be taken upstream to senior management to say, this is what the contribution of payments are. This is what happens if we're down for an hour. This is what happens if we decline X number of customers, we never see them again or what have you, and start building the particular case. At that time, then it becomes a matter of a little bit, as you were describing earlier on, Bruce, the culture of the company. What is the best way to achieve the culture? Because at that point, the individual that is targeted to become a CPO becomes a significant socializer and evangelist, and that's what is required. Many cases, many people are looking the other direction, and they need to listen to an evangelist that is basically speaking for the payments function and telling people, hey, this is what we do, and this is what it is important. Not because I want to create a big CPO role and have the C in front of my name, but because by having this focus, we can make a contribution to the value of the company.
So I'm going to say this back to you with just one word: measurements, metrics. So step one, start measuring to be able to help people see what's so obvious to us, which is the absolute criticality of payments and the incredible leverage that you can have when you apply that correctly. We had some more questions kind of streaming in as you were chatting. We will be delighted to reach out to you. Some of you we have contact information for. Some of you don't. So if you don't mind sending us a quick shout out on an email, we'll be happy to take some more of these questions about ACH, virtual cards, and other things, as well as resources for education. Several of you have asked about that. So we'll send that out to you if you just make sure we know how to get a hold of you. Thank you, Rene. Thank you so much for the time today. Thank you for joining another version of the Payments Geek Roundtable, a little more of the career, how to win friends, influence people, and become the Chief Payments Officer, probably the hottest title to hold in the coming several years.
Hey, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to chat, and thank you to the audience for hanging in here.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I should play the song one more time as we go out. All right, here we go. Oh, yeah, the outro. See you, everybody.